Hillary Clinton says you are complicit in murder if you disagree with her on gun control policy. Jimmy Kimmel is back for more. Jimmy Kimmel just couldn't leave well enough alone. He decided to go back on the air last night and double down on the "you're mean and cruel if you disagree with me on gun control." We begin today with more fallout from Las Vegas. So President Trump yesterday, he did sort of what he likes to do when he's asked a question that he doesn't know the answer to, which is he says, "I'll think about it." So yesterday the media asked him about gun control, and here was Trump's answer.
We have a tragedy. We're going to do, and what happened in Las Vegas is in many ways a miracle. The police department has done such an incredible job, and we'll be talking about gun laws as time goes by.
Okay, so the very end of it is what people are focused on. The left is focusing on where he said that what happened in Vegas was a miracle. Of course, he's only talking about the law enforcement response. He's not talking about the shooting itself. People taking him out of context here are ridiculous. Clearly, he's not talking about Americans being murdered being a miracle. But it's that last part where he says, we'll talk about gun control as time goes by, that has a lot of people on the left very hopeful. Now, is Trump actually going to pursue that? No, he's not going to pursue any of that. That's Trump's go-to when he doesn't know what to say or he just wants to say something to leave the media with something to think about. But the reality is that Republicans are not pushing gun control right now because no gun control measure that I can think of or that anyone on the left can think of would have stopped what just happened in Las Vegas. Why? Because it was unprecedented, because it was unthinkable, and because the guy bought all of his guns legally, or at least the ones he used legally, apparently, and because he passed all federal background checks, had no symptoms of mental illness, from what we know. That's what makes this whole thing so mind-boggling, this whole deal. So one of the things the left's been doing, as I discussed yesterday at length with Jimmy Kimmel, is they have been jumping on their high horse and suggesting that if you disagree with them about gun policy, it's because you're bad. Now, in order to do that, very often what the left likes to do is trot out people who have been victims of gun violence, people who were shot. And they say, well, these people know better than anyone. As you know, I'm not a fan of this procedure, this technique. I don't think that you being shot makes you an expert on gun policy any more than I think you being sick makes you an expert on health policy, or you paying taxes makes you an expert on tax policy, right? You actually have to study issues in order to have expertise on them. But one of the things I find really fascinating is that if you are a gunshot victim and you disagree with the left, they just pretend you don't exist. So Steve Scalise is probably the most famous gunshot victim in the country at this point. Steve Scalise, of course, the Louisiana congressperson who was shot by a crazed Bernie Sanders supporter in the congressional baseball shooting just a few months back. And Steve Scalise was asked specifically about Las Vegas and the Second Amendment, and here was his answer.
Inevitably, questions about the Second Amendment are raised by what happened in Las Vegas. It happens almost immediately. Have your experience of your own and what you saw in Las Vegas, has it changed how you feel about any of that?
I think it's fortified it because, first of all, you've got to recognize that, when there's a tragedy like this, the first thing we should be thinking about is praying for the people who were injured and doing whatever we can to help them, to help law enforcement. We shouldn't first be thinking of promoting our political agenda.
Okay, but he's not allowed to say that. Steve Scalise doesn't exist. Watch as he disappears from the media, even though, again, he's the most famous gunshot victim in the country right now. Why? Because he still has principles, and he has good reason for this, okay? If there hadn't been armed guards there at the congressional baseball shooting, he'd probably be dead now. The fact is that it was arms that stopped that monster, that bad human being, and it's arms that stopped the guy in Las Vegas. If the police don't approach the room, the guy doesn't shoot himself. He just continues firing down into the crowd. Again, the evidence that gun control would solve any of the problems that you saw in Las Vegas is really weak or non-existent. Leah Labresco, she's a statistician and former writer at 538, and she has a Washington Post column today that I think is really worthwhile, talking about how before she started researching gun deaths, gun control policy used to frustrate her, and she used to be anti-NRA, and she used to think that shrinking magazine sizes and all of this would actually help with gun deaths and mass shootings. And then she did the research, and she found that that isn't true. Here's what she wrote, quote, "My colleagues and I at 538 spent 3 months analyzing all 33,000 lives ended by guns each year in the United States. I wound up frustrated in a whole new way. We looked at what interventions might have saved those people, and the case for the policies I'd lobbied for crumbled when I examined the evidence. The best ideas left standing were narrowly tailored interventions to protect subtypes of potential victims, not broad attempts to limit the lethality of guns." And then she talks about Australia. She says that Britain and Australia didn't prove much what America's policy should be. She said neither nation experienced drops in mass shootings or other gun-related crime that could be attributed to their buybacks and bans. She says, as I said yesterday, mass shootings were too rare in Australia for their absence after the buyback program to be clear evidence of progress. And she goes through all of the gun measures that have been suggested, and she points out that the next largest set of gun deaths after suicide, number one is suicide. This is all stuff I said yesterday. Number one cause of gun death in the United States is suicide. Number two are young men aged 15 to 34 killed in homicide, very often in gang violence. But the left never wants to talk about that because that would suggest different policies, including jailing people from gangs who commit violent acts for longer periods of time in order to tamp down crime. I mean, it's really funny. The same left that says we need to let people out of jail is saying we should put gun owners in jail. So the people who actually commit crimes with guns we should let out. The people who just own a gun we should throw in. This seems to be the logic of some people on the left. And that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not much of one, right? The idea is that if you buy a type of gun the left doesn't like, you should go to jail. But if you are in jail, we have an overpopulation in prison problem. We have a school we have a streets to jail pipeline. It's just foolish. Okay, so we should release all those people, but we should put all the law-abiding people who want to buy a gun that you don't want them to have in jail. None of this makes sense. None of it is effective. But again, none of this has to do with policy for the left. The left thinks that it's going to win on emotional lines because very often it does. Right on healthcare policy, the left does win along emotional lines. On gun control, it doesn't. The reason is too many Americans own guns. Too many people are familiar with how guns work. There are hundreds of millions of guns in the United States of America. And the implication that everyone who is somehow a gun owner is part of this evil is just absurd to people. That's not stopping the Democrats, though. So Hillary Clinton yesterday, she came out and she said, Republicans are complicit in Vegas.
Do you feel like they're complicit, the GOP, the NRA, in the gun epidemic we're seeing in America?
Of course they are. Of course they are. You know, the Brady bill actually kept 2 million guns out of the hands of people who weren't supposed to have them. If we had gone forward with the background check capacity that we should have had, and that it was up to date. My gosh, we computerize everything and we can't computerize that. Mm-hmm. Dylan Roof was never supposed to get that gun that he used to kill people at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston because he had a pre-existing arrest that should have disqualified him. But the system, is deliberately kept all creaky and slow. This is beyond absurd. This is evil. Mm-hmm. This is nothing but pure, unadulterated greed motivated by people who want to sell as many guns as they can to engage in a falsity of fear and rhetoric about why everybody has to have guns.
Okay, what absolute nonsense. What absolute nonsense. So everybody who wants to be able to buy guns legally, these are the people who are the problem, and people are deliberately keeping the system leaky. Okay, so here's the background on Dylan Roof, just so that you have the factual background. According to the New York Times, despite having previously admitted to drug possession, Dylan Roof was allowed to buy a .45 caliber handgun because of mistakes by FBI agents, a failure by local prosecutors to respond to a bureau request for more information about his case, and a weakness in federal gun laws. So what happened? Apparently, the authorities' inability to prevent Roof from obtaining the weapon highlighted the continuing background check system problem, which was intended to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Despite new procedures and billions of dollars, the federal authorities still do not have a seamless way of examining Americans' criminal histories that eliminates human error. Okay, do you think that Republicans don't want to eliminate human error? Democrats were in charge of the government for a huge percentage of the time, right? Barack Obama was president when all of this happened. He could help facilitate this. It's his FBI. Right, but somehow this is Republicans' fault, right? They're evil. They're evil. They want people to shoot people so that they can sell more guns. If you really believe that, you don't know any gun owners and you don't know any Republicans. The Democrats, though, are starting to really, I think, reveal what they think about gun owners and what they think about guns, which is refreshing. I mean, I like when there's a little bit of honesty in this process. And in just a minute, I'm going to show you what Democrats have been saying about what sorts of guns they want to, what sorts of guns they want to ban. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so there's Hillary Clinton doing the moral posturing, and the moral posturing is designed to undergird a program of gun seizures.
How could this have been prevented? Is there a law? Congressman Himes ultimately said, yes, he'd be for a ban on semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15. How about you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, let's just be clear that the pace of these epic mass shootings, 10 or more people being killed, doubled after the assault weapons ban expired. That's not a coincidence. I think we also have to look at these aftermarket modifications that allows you fairly to turn an automatic weapon, turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon. But, Willie, I also don't think we can be caught in this trap. I think the gun lobby wants you, in the wake of one of these mass shootings, to only talk about about the policy changes that would have affected the shooting that happened the day before. We have to get back to the evergreen changes, things like universal background checks that frankly probably would have stopped many of the other murders around the country that happened on Sunday before the shooting started in Las Vegas.
Okay, so number one, so again, that is not true. Many of the guns that are used in crime, I believe the majority of guns that are used in crime are not obtained legally. The idea that in mass shootings, the people are not going through federal background checks is not true. This shooter did go through a federal background check. I believe that the shooter in the Pulse nightclub shooting went through a federal background check. So the idea that all of these measures would have stopped any of this is not true. But notice what he glosses over there. And that is that he says he supports a ban on semi-automatic rifles. Okay, understand that's pretty much every rifle in the country. Pretty much every rifle in the country is a semi-automatic rifle because, again, a semi-automatic just means you pull the trigger once and one round is fired. That's all a semi-automatic means. AR, people think it stands for assault rifle. Of course it does not. Okay, AR-15 is one of the most popular sporting rifles in the country. You ban that, you're talking about either having to confiscate literally tens of millions of these guns from law-abiding Americans or preventing them from buying those guns on the market right now with federally licensed firearms dealers and background checks and the whole deal. Democrats are starting to come out of the closet as to what they want here, and Americans aren't going to like it. It's so funny. The Democrats, after a mass shooting, they always think, ooh, now the tide of public opinion is with us. The tide of public opinion is with the idea that we're all together in this and we hate mass shooters and we want them to die and they're evil people. We're all on that, but we're not all together on the policies that you prescribe because the policies you prescribe are very much contra traditional American concepts about freedom and liberty and gun ownership. It's not just Chris Murphy who's tried to make hay off of this. You also have people, like Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, arguing that the founders didn't want people to be able to purchase guns.
When the Second Amendment was written in order to maintain a well-regulated militia, they did not have in mind that people could purchase guns indiscriminately, go up into the top of buildings and rain down this death.
Okay, again, that's not true. Obviously, the fact is that the founders, again, the founders did believe that you should be able to own weapons that you could use in the militia, right? That meant a military-grade weapon. We're not even talking about people owning military-grade weapons. As I said yesterday, the difference between a civilian AR and military AR is extraordinarily significant, right? A civilian AR is a semi-automatic. A fully militarized AR, right? An M16 or an M4. Now, these guns have the capacity for burst fire or fully automatic. So there is a big difference. But again, all this really is the left attempting to use emotion in place of real policy. So, Jimmy Kimmel was back last night, and Jimmy Kimmel is not backing down off of his "I am holier than you are. I care more about people who died. Therefore, you must agree with me." Here's what he had to say last night to critics like me, who said that his gun monologue last night was factually incorrect.
I'm not going to get deep into it again tonight. I said what I had to say last night, but I do want to say something to these nuts who spent most of the day today on television and online attacking those of us who think we need to do something about the fact that 59 innocent people were killed. They say
Can you pause there for 1 second?
to be.
Okay, so first of all, we didn't spend yesterday attacking people who think that something has to be done. We attacked you for attacking Americans and saying that Americans are basically a bunch of dunder-headed, cruel jackasses if they don't agree with you on policy. I mean, if you actually want to propose a policy, we can talk about the policy. What I said in the minutes after the shooting is, how about we get all the information on the shooting and then we talk policy? That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. Now, I'm not saying we should never talk policy. I'm saying we should talk policy once the information is in. Why is this a difficult concept? Evidence, information. But again, Kimmel is strawmanning here. He's basically suggesting that all of us who criticized him we just don't want to do anything, and that's why we're criticizing him. No, I'm criticizing you because what you're saying is factually incorrect, and then you're implying that those of us who want evidence to back our policies are somehow cruel and nasty. Okay, he continues.
Talking about it because it's too soon. Well, maybe it's too soon for you because deep down inside, in your heart, you bear some responsibility for the fact that almost anyone can get any weapon they want. Now you want to cover yourself until the storm of outrage passes. You can go back to your dirty business as usual, but it's not too soon for us because we're Americans, and last time I checked, the First Amendment is at least as important as the Second Amendment. So we will talk about it.
Jimmy, I mean, seriously, this is egregious stuff. I hope you're a better person than this, but this is really egregious stuff. If I didn't think you were a better person than this, I'd tell you to go to hell, because that's ridiculous, okay? For you to suggest, go back to your dirty business. What's my dirty business? The same business as yours, okay? Exercising my First Amendment rights to talk about policy and politics. Okay, the idea that it's a dirty business if we disagree with you. I'm not selling guns. That's not what I do. Okay, I've never sold a gun. I own 2 of them. I have never sold a gun. I'm not in the gun sales business. And it's not a dirty business for people to be in the gun sales business, selling methods of self-defense to Americans who want to defend themselves and their country. Okay, that's just insane. But the suggestion that I bear responsibility for Vegas, the only person who bears responsibility for Vegas is the guy who's pulling the trigger on a bunch of people who are innocent standing below. If we're going to do that routine now, if we're going to suggest that we bear responsibility for our public policy choices with regard to gun control, then I would suggest that Jimmy Kimmel bears responsibility for every dead baby that he backs through Planned Parenthood. Okay, there's a significantly greater connection between that. Planned Parenthood's sole goal is to kill babies. You know, the goal of selling rifles is not to kill innocent people. But I don't do that, right? I'm not saying that Jimmy Kimmel is responsible for every dead baby in the country, because that's absurd. Okay, abortionists are responsible for that. I think he's wrong on policy. I think he's probably good-hearted. For Jimmy Kimmel to suggest that everybody who disagrees with him, again, is just so disgusting. For him to suggest that I have some sort of blood guilt on my soul and that's why I don't want to talk about this. I've been talking about it all week, dude. I've made my bones talking about gun control and the case for and against. I know a lot more about it than Jimmy Kimmel does. And for Jimmy Kimmel to suggest that anyone who wants to talk about it who's not named Jimmy Kimmel is somehow motivated by their dirty business, their greed. I promise you, Jimmy Kimmel makes a hell of a lot more money than I do. Jimmy Kimmel's making a lot of money off a lot of leftists who think that he is just the bee's knees because he does this kind of stuff. So if we're going to talk about who's making more money off political pandering, Jimmy, I don't think that's a business you want to get into. Okay, but it's not just Kimmel. Even more objective journalists like Chuck Todd are suggesting that, you know, it's just a fear of talking about gun control that's led to this impasse.
Folks, there's no doubt about what the Second Amendment does say. But at what point does a person's right to bear arms start infringing on his neighbor's right to live safely and freely? And if you've ever caught yourself checking the exits while at a concert hall or a school assembly or a movie, just in case, you probably already are ready to have that conversation. You would think our leaders should be able to have it too.
Well, again, I think there's actually a pretty easy answer to when does my neighbor's right to bear arms impinge on my ability to live freely, and it's when he starts shooting at me. Okay, that's pretty simple answer. I mean, that's like saying, when does your neighbor's right to own a sword impinge on your right not to be chopped? Well, when he starts trying to chop me. Again, I think there are arguments to be made about what sorts of machine guns have been banned in the United States since 1986. I think that's reasonable. But, you know, but this suggestion that we have not been having the conversation we have, it's just the left is angry because they've been losing, because they don't have any evidence to support their positions. It's just infused the entire culture. You can't even watch sports anymore without this routine. Rachel Nichols on ESPN. Again, ESPN should be staying out of this, but we remember back in 2012 when Bob Costas was doing halftime reports on the NFL, and he decided to inject his own politics. Now we've got Rachel Nichols doing this on gun control.
Officials say this is the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. A phrase I guess they're getting used to because it was only 14 months ago they were saying that about the shooting in Orlando. The Orlando shooting claimed more lives than Virginia Tech. Now this one claims more lives than what happened in Orlando. I don't know how we're going to solve the debate about guns in this country. I just know that while we're all arguing, the body counts keep going up. And more
so we have to stop arguing, you see.
Suffering.
You know, we have to stop arguing is what she's saying. And the only way to stop arguing is for us to agree with her. I do love that the talking points for Chuck Todd and Rachel Nichols are nearly identical with regard to these mass shootings. As I said yesterday, using mass shootings as your gauge of gun control policy is actually a foolish idea because they are not representative of the broader whole. I'm not the only one saying that. 538 says that, okay? Nate Silver's site says that. Nate Silver is no right-winger on guns. And then, of course, you have the greatest of all political commentators of the left, Keith Olbermann. So he attacked me on Twitter this morning. I had said yesterday who made Jimmy Kimmel the moral arbiter, and Keith Olbermann tweeted, because whores like real Donald Trump, the GOP, and Ben Shapiro have sold their souls to the NRA and the death cult. Any other questions, kid? So, a few things. Number one, is the suggestion that every single person in the United States who owns a gun and believes in gun rights is part of a death cult? Because I think that, again, death cults could be more properly attributed to people who think that Planned Parenthood is doing wonderful work in killing babies.